which is Group A, so we can find out who the top-placed teams in Group B will face. First, Porto. And for Porto to qualify, they need to trigger a tiebreaker clause, right? So, first, only a win is of interest to Porto. Porto won't qualify with a draw, okay? So, only a win is of interest to Porto. First, I'm talking about Porto, okay? Let's go. Porto has 1 point. If they win, they'll be 4. They need Inter Miami to beat Palmeiras so they have a chance. Because if Palmeiras beats Inter Miami, it will have the same score as Inter Miami. But the first criterion is the direct confrontation between the teams. And then Inter Miami goes through, because in that case, there would only be 2 teams tied with 4 points. If Porto wins and Inter Miami beats Palmeiras, then it will be Palmeiras and Porto playing a tiebreaker. In that case, the first tiebreaker is the direct confrontation. They are tied. The second, which is the goal difference between them. They are tied because they finished the first game 0-0. The third is goal scored between them. And they are tied because it ended 0-0. And that is the overall goal difference, not in the direct confrontation. So you have Palmeiras at this moment with a goal difference of 2 and Porto with a goal difference of -1. Assuming that Palmeiras lost to Inter Miami by a 1-goal difference, then Palmeiras has a goal difference of 1. Assuming that Porto beat Ahly by a 1-goal difference, just to imagine the scenario, Palmeiras would still get through on goal difference. What Palmeiras can have is a worse goal difference than Porto. Is it possible? Yes. If Porto beats Ahly by 2 goals, Porto will have a goal difference of 1 more. And if Palmeiras loses by 1 goal, it will have a goal difference of 1 more. Then another tiebreaker criterion comes into play, which is goal scored. In this case, since Palmeiras scored 2 goals against Ahly's team, and Porto scored 1 goal against Inter Miami, and theoretically would have scored 2 against Ahly, it would have gotten through to Porto. So Palmeiras will only be eliminated if it first loses to Inter Miami. So, if Porto beats Ahly by 2 goals, it can lose to Inter Miami, and second loses on goal difference. It can even lose to Inter Miami, and it can even tie on goal difference with Porto. But if it can score at least goals against Inter Miami, it will help. For example, if they lose 4-3, they still lose a goal difference, but they're scoring 3 goals. Okay? So in the case of Palmeiras, we just have to avoid that, right? But let's talk about Porto first. Porto needs a win, and a win by at least 2 goals difference here, in addition to rooting for Inter Miami. Now I ask you, what did Porto show against the Palmeiras team and against the Inter Miami team? I honestly can't trust this Porto team. I'll never recommend you to bet on Porto with that 1.75. Not even against Inter Miami. When I believed in a Porto win, I recommended that lower OD for Porto. Because Porto has it and this championship has been like that a lot, right? The price correction has been very frequent. So, in this case, you could have a scenario where Porto increases this OD very quickly, and you, if you want to bet on Porto, get out of the game at a higher OD, okay? So, for me, it's a favorite that could get complicated. Because the need for a win doesn't necessarily mean a win, right? Ushwin isn't a win. I need Porto to play better. They didn't play at all, okay? And obviously, since the game is at the same time, you can have Palmeiras taking the lead against Inter Miami and Porto, already losing hard at halftime. So honestly, I don't like this quote for Porto. Is there any chance of Ahly going through? Well, Ahly has a draw with Inter Miami. Right is an advantage. With that, Ahly needs the opposite. Ahly needs to root for Palmeiras to go through, right? Palmeiras beat Inter Miami, keeping Inter Miami with 4 points. Ahly needs to beat Porto to reach 4 points, and then they'll have to start this tiebreaker scenario. Since Inter Miami tied 0-0, the total points, goal difference, and goals scored between them and the goal difference between them are also tied. And then a new criterion comes into play, which is the overall goal difference criterion. In this case, Inter Miami has a goal difference. But assuming again that they lose by a goal difference to Palmeiras, they will have a goal difference of 0. So for that, Ahly needs at least 2 goals here against Porto to reach 0. If they score 2 goals against Porto, they will tie with Inter Miami also in the goal difference criterion and will also tie in the goal scored criterion. Because they will have to, and Inter Miami has to. Then it will be open, my friends. Tiebreaker by cards and everything else. And I won't even get into Saluma, okay? The only need here is at least a victory by a 2-goal difference. You realize then that both teams need to win by a 2-goal difference at least. But if I ask you if either of these teams is giving you confidence, I think it's very difficult. Because in 2 games, Porto only scored 1 goal, and in 2 games, Ahly didn't score any. Ahly will enter the field with an OD of R50, needing to win and still win by 2 goals. And Porto will enter the field after 2 terrible games, especially the second one, having to win by 2 goals. It's 1 against Ahly, who has only conceded 2 goals. So far, both against Palmeiras. Look, for me, honestly, it's a game for price correction. It's a game to avoid betting on the results market with these lower odds. We've already seen that Porto hasn't played an interesting role for this type of odds. Even if you remember Porto in the Portuguese league, it wasn't a good performance there. But of course, there's a chance that Porto will win. But I always tell you about the price. I need a higher OD to be able to make it worth it here, okay? Because Awali's defense isn't bad, right? Regarding the Egyptian team, I honestly won't recommend a win with this odds of 450. For me, the best scenario is to avoid a game for the results market. The goal market is also dangerous because both teams really need to win, but they really need to win by a 2-goal difference. So if one of the 2 teams actually reaches that 2-goal difference, the game could cool down, especially for the team that's winning, okay? So be careful when looking for a 3.5 or 2.5 scenario in this game. Because if Ahly actually scores 2 goals, or Porto scores 2 goals and we have a 2-0 scenario, we could have a game that cools down, right? Not because the opponent that's losing doesn't want to play, but maybe because the team that's winning is holding on, okay? And another thing, as time goes by and there's no winner, or at least one team ahead in the other match, which is Palmeiras and Inter Miami, these 2 teams are being eliminated. They're hugging each other, okay? So they need to do their part, but they also need to hope for a good result in the other game. Honestly, if you can ignore this game, I think it's better for your financial health. We have Akar, who is ARL's main striker, who has been scoring goals away from home since the first minutes against Inter Miami, and we have a terrible Porto offensively so far, and we have relatively well-positioned defenses. So I wouldn't go into this game to look for much, okay? I'll leave it as a complimentary game too. I've even marked it as a possibility for a price adjustment, right? Players for Porto and Ahly, well, this is a game context where both teams win, so it could even be a game of exchanges. I'll look more at the finishers, okay? In the game against Inter Miami, Samu finished on target twice. He ends up being Porto's main option because he's a player who gets called upon a lot, okay? Mura finished once, I'd stick with those 2. Okay, on Porto's side, Rodrigo Mura and Samu, who has a difficult surname. On Awali's side, with Akar out, Abu Ahly was left with this option, right? But against Palmeiras, he couldn't finish even once. Ter Seguai, who is a player who missed the penalty against Inter Miami in the first game of the World Cup, is a weak player in my opinion. From what he has shown so far, but I don't doubt that he wants to show some kind of result in this game against Porto. So I would go with these 2, Abu Ahly and 3EG, okay? For stealing the ball and committing fouls, I still think AI is the main option. He stole 2 balls against Palmeiras and committed 2 fouls. He had already stolen many balls against Inter Miami, and on Porto's side, for stealing the ball against Inter Miami, the one who stole the ball the most here was Fabio Vieira with 2 steals, okay? I would go with that context, finishing and stealing the ball. Inter Miami and Palmeiras. Well, here we can basically have a game of gossip, because if Inter Miami and Palmeiras draw, we will have both teams qualified. The difference is this. Since Palmeiras has the advantage in goal difference at this moment, Palmeiras would go through in first place if they drew here, right? So what's the difference between going through in first place and in second place? Are you going to pick? Since PSG will most likely win, the Palmeiras team will depend on Botafogo's result. But the advantage is that Palmeiras will enter the field at 10 a.m. Already knowing who is in first place and who is in second place in Group B, and that is the question. Depending on the context, let's suppose that Palmeiras sees Botafogo losing by 1 goal to Atletico PSG. Winning PSG was in fact in first place. Then, my friends, second place will be a desired second place. But in this case, for us to have a change in position, let's suppose, look, Palmeiras is in first place and wants to go through in second. Place for him to come in second, he would have to lose the game. And if he loses the game, he could create a huge problem, which is Porto beating Ahly. So you see, I want to avoid PSG, so I'm going to lose to Miami. But if I lose to Miami, Porto might beat Ahly, and I could be eliminated. I honestly think that this thought doesn't cross the Palmeiras team. It goes through the fans' heads, not the Palmeiras. Teams in Inter Miami, with all due respect, wasn't even for tie. So if he already has the possibility of qualifying with a draw, even if he faces PSG in the round of 16, it could be an interesting scenario. Yes, we could think of a friendly game, a draw game. Okay? If Botafogo went through in first place, and Inter Miami knows that if they stay in second place, they will face Botafogo, even if Botafogo beat PSG, okay? I believe that Inter Miami will be much more comfortable being able to face Porto, so there will be even more interest in a draw. Depending on the result at 4 p.m., this game here could in fact be labeled as a possible game of chance. The problem is, since Palmeiras will stay in the position anyway, they just can't lose. I don't doubt that they want to win, okay? I don't doubt that they want to win. So I'll give you the following scenario. Where would I bet in favor of? Palmeiras here, okay? Or against at least LA, the worst team on the field, Inter Miami. What would make me enter this game? First, who finished in first place in the other group? If Botafogo tied with Atletico de Madrid and finished in first place, Palmeiras will no longer be able to face any other opponent here other than PSG, because most likely PSG won. With that, as if Palmeiras draws or wins, they will stay in first place anyway. Inter Miami will enter extremely comfortable and will be able to play for a draw. Then we can think about reading the worst team on the field against Inter Miami, or even a double chance or a draw against Palmeiras. Now, if it's the other way around, if PSG is in first place, Inter Miami might want a little more to go for a win, but it's like that. If you expose yourself too much and lose to Palmeiras, you also have the possibility of a Ahly winning against Porto. So, in the end, I believe it could be a great game. I don't recommend the goal market because a goal difference can make the game, especially for the winning team, cool down. So, honestly, I think it's a game where we should think about a goalless draw or a double chance for Palmeiras, if Botafogo finished in first place in Group B, and Inter Miami has practically confirmed that they will face PSG and qualify in second place. I don't think Inter Miami will run the risk of being eliminated by losing to Palmeiras and still seeing Ahly beat Porto here. So, to me, it smells like a game of chance. It could be an under game. How much is the hate for under 2.5 here? 1.50. Right, it hasn't been such an over championship, but I'm not going to bet on under either, okay? But I wouldn't doubt a game to correct the price. Since Palmeiras is the favorite, I would say that it's a game of chance. I think it's a game of chance. I wouldn't doubt a favor. Yes, it's not that much of a favorite, okay? But it's a favorite. That could get complicated because Palmeiras doesn't need a win. But if Botafogo stays in first place, I don't doubt that Inter Miami will sit back and let time pass. And this tie will be canceled, or this double chance for Palmeiras could be interesting, okay? On Palmeiras' side against Inter Miami, we have the possibility of a close game, right? And then we can think of a tighter, more defensive game. Don't doubt that a game will also focus more on stealing the ball. I don't doubt that a game will also focus more on stealing the ball. I don't doubt that a game will also focus more on stealing the ball. I don't doubt that a game will also focus more on stealing the ball. Look, against the Porto team, Inter Miami had Busquets with 3 steals of the ball, Benjamin Cremate with 5 steals of the ball, and Suarez with 3. I would usually recommend Busquets, right? who is a more consistent player, because Cremate might not even play. So I'll go with Busquets to steal the ball. And Palmeiras against Ahly. The main stealers in this regard were Anibal Moreno and Richard de Rios. Peak race is always a constant option, right? But Richard de Rios also had a good game against Ahly. I would stick with these two, Richard Rios and peak race, okay? In terms of fouls committed, Richard Rios' team commits more fouls, right? He committed a lot, right? So it could be interesting. If you want to keep an eye on finishing, because you obviously have Messi on the field. Messi only shot on target once against Porto, which was that set-piece goal. Then you'll see if it's worth it, because the odds will probably be very low. I don't know if it's worth it. And as for Palmeiras' team, Flaco Lopez only shot once on Allianz goal. Asterisk, thank you for being here in our video, okay? Thank you if you liked it, leave a like. Till the next video.